welcome to part 2 of installing Archinux on Virtualbox on a Mac. Now, if you haven't already downloaded the ISO for Arch and built your virtual machine, then please go and watch part 1 where I talk you through doing those 2 steps. In this video, we're going to go as far as partitioning and formatting our disk, and then in the next part we'll look at installing Arch itself. So there's a few things we need to do here in this first section. And that is, first of all, to check that we have an internet connection. The way Arch works is a cutting-edge, up-to-date versioning system, and so whenever you install, it always fetches all of the packages from the current packages. So if a package got brought out today, for example, this morning, even though I downloaded this ISO a week ago, it will always install me the latest packages that were released as of today. So we're going to do a quick test to make sure we've got an internet connection on our virtual machine. And we're going to type ping -c for count 5 because I want to ping 5 times. Archinux.org. Now, as you can see, that's pinging nicely and will give us a 0% packet loss. If it wasn't working, it would tell us it timed out and there would be 100% packet loss. But as there isn't, we've got a connection to the internet, so we're good to carry on. The next important thing is to set the correct keyboard layout. Now, this is something that's normally taken care of for you, or you get a menu that pops up in your installing that says, tell us what keyboard you want. Well, this is what we're doing here. Now, you're going to have to do this twice, because we're doing it now for the installer to make sure that the installer is using the right keyboard, but when we actually build the system, we're also going to need to specify it again. So once you know what it is, it's good to note it down or whatever, so when you want to use it again. Now, as it happens, I'm using a US keyboard because the MacBook Pros in the UK are actually US key maps with English characters sort of stamped on them. If you've got a PC, though, with a UK keyboard or a Spanish keyboard or whatever, you will need to load in your key map. Just to give you a helping hand on that, ls for list, user share keyboard key maps. Now, quickly there you'll see they're based on machine type. i386 is what you want for a PC. Helps if I put a / in there. Now, that then breaks us down to the keyboard types. In my case, it's a QWERTY keyboard. And there is a list of all the QWERTY keyboards that are available. If you wanted to install the UK one, it's called UK. You basically want the bit before the dot map. So you would type load keys UK if you wanted to install the UK keyboard, or you would choose ES if you wanted to have the Spanish keyboard, the Latin one if you wanted the Latin one, German keyboard, etc. I'm not going to load one now because I have a US keyboard. By default, it is US keyboard, so if you've got a US keyboard, you don't need to do anything for this. The next thing we need to check is that our time on this machine is correct. As it happens, the time on my machine isn't correct, so what we're going to do to make sure everything's good is use the command set NTP for network time protocol, which basically means we're going to go off and ask one of the time servers on the internet to synchronize the time for us, and we're going to use true to say yes or on. Basically, we do want that to be true. Now, if we double check it again now, you'll see it says network time is on, and you'll see it's now synchronized. Now we know that the time that we're using is the right time, and all the timestamps and everything else that the machine's going to use from this point onwards are going to be correct. Now, I've deliberately followed the guide, and I suggest that whenever you install Arch, even if you get confident with it, you do check the installation guide out and follow it along just to make sure that you don't get stuck. Now, because we're using Virtualbox, obviously we can do this, we've got a working desktop and whatever. If you do brave this and decide to stick Arch on a machine literally on a machine, don't panic, because Arch has already thought about people like you just didn't know it. If you just had, let's just pretend, that didn't work very well, but imagine if you had a full screen and you didn't have a window, and you're working in an actual console on an actual machine, drifting slightly off topic, you can actually have the website's installation guide available to you because you have the internet, and you can, if I can remember how to do this now, I think it's Alt and arrow key. It is. So if you press down the Alt key and use the left and right arrow keys, you can switch between virtual terminals. So basically all you do is you'd log into that one and then use a program called eLinks, and eLinks is a web browser, and you could go to eLinks and load Archlinux's page and navigate it as a text based browser, and so you could then have in this window all of the instructions and just switch between the working window and that. So that's how you could do it if you didn't have a windowed environment, just for those of you that are feeling a bit hardcore. But we'll do it this way because it's just easier. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to partition our disks. Now, just for the sake of the fact you'll see it a lot, disks are called block devices because basically we save blocks of data on the disks. So there's two ways of looking for it. There's LSBLK, which stands for list block devices. And as you can see there's our block device, SDA 8 gig drive that we created in part 1. You can also use fdisk-list, which will also show me this. Now at the moment it's showing me there's an 8 gig drive with nothing on it, absolutely nothing, not even a partition table. Later on I'll show you this and you'll see what it looks like when it's been done. So without further ado, shall we partition our drive? Just a quick stop here, partitioning. So the idea is we have a big 8 gig drive and we're going to partition it up like a house or an office. So we're going to have 3 partitions, we're going to separate it into 3 chunks of different sizes, different size rooms, right? And I'll tell you what we're doing as we're doing it. So fdisk dev SDA, which is what it told us it was called. Now you'll notice straight away here it says that the device does not contain a recognized partition table. Created a new DOS disk label. Basically it's created as a partition table. It's a DOS partition table. Now you may have heard of other types called GPT. I'm not going to talk about that here, or in fact booting systems with the UEFI either. They're all things outside of the scope of this video. But a lot of modern systems use them, and so it's worth reading up on them. But for these basic tests of having a bit of fun with Arch Linux, we're just going to keep it real simple. And so we're just going to go with the old DOS version because we're only going to have 3 partitions and it's all going to be good, right? So the first thing we need to do is create the first partition with N, which is for like new. It says P for primary, that's fine. We want it to be partition 1, so that's fine. Go with the default for the start location. Now it's asking us the last sector, basically how big do we want this to be. Put a plus sign and the size. In this case 500, capital M for megabytes. That's now created me a new partition 1, type Linux, and it's got a size of 500 meg. That's going to be our boot partition. New again, primary again, 2 is fine, start point is fine. We want this one to be 1 gigabyte, so 1 and a capital G. This is going to be our swap drive. Now, swap is a different type to Linux, so we need to change the type. So we're going to press T for type. Do we want to do it to partition 2? Yes, we do. Now then, just to show you, if you do capital L like it says for lists and press enter, it gives you a list of all the available types. Now we want this to be a Linux swap type, and that code number is 82. So you type 82 in there and it's changed it to a swap type. And finally, we want to create one more primary partition. It's number 3. We start at the default and we're just going to press enter to use the rest of the disk. That's now created as a 6.5 gig drive to the end of the drive. And if we type P for print, it'll now show us the 3 partitions. These haven't been applied to the disk yet. This is what it's going to apply. If we decided we didn't want to do this, if we just quit out now, it won't do anything to the disk. But do make sure you write it or it won't do anything to the disk. So as you can see there, it's telling us that this is what it's going to look like. We're going to have the first one, which is our boot drive. Then we're going to have the second one, which is our swap drive. And then the third one, which is going to be our main drive with all the rest of our files in it. Press W for write and press enter, and that is now written to the disk. That's the disk partitioned. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to make file systems for these 3 partitions. This is where I'm going to end this video, so you can just go over this setting the disks up part and formatting them part. When you're happy with that, we'll go on to part 3, where we'll actually start mounting them and installing actual Arch onto them. So what we need to do here is set a file system on each one of these devices, because these are like partitions, like I say, partition rooms, but they've got nothing in them at the minute. And we need a file system because it's a bit like, how do I explain this? It's a bit like having a big set of partitioned rooms with nothing in them, but we want to put some pigeonholes in those rooms, like little boxes or whatever. So now we have the file system, which is all the little boxes that will go inside that space, which we can then store things in. Hope that kind of makes sense. So we're going to use a thing called makefilesystem, MKFS, and we're going to use ext4 as our file system. It's a very popular file system for Linux systems. There are lots of new ones about. If you install some stuff, you'll see they use XFS and other beautiful things. Don't worry about that for now. ext4 is a good all-rounder. It is a good one to start learning on, to be honest, and pretty much works on all of them. So we're going to make that for dev. Now, SDA is the drive, but we need to specify the partition we want to format. So we're going to partition format number 1. Format partition number 1. There it goes. And partition number 3, but not number 2, because 2 was our swap. Because swap is special, we're going to use make swap dev SDA partition number 2. That's now made us a special swap drive. So now basically we've set all our disks up. And as you can see them there now, look, there's SDA, the drive, and there are the 3 partitions on the drive. And if we just do a quick fdisk, you can see now that we've done something, fdisk shows us that we have a DOS type partition table on here, and that we have our lovely 3 partitions. So we've now created 3 partitions, and we've formatted them up with file systems, which means they're now ready to be used. I think we'll draw this video to a close at this point, so not to sort of overload you with too much stuff. So you can go over this video as many times as you want to get that file system created and get everything set up ready for the next step in part 3, which is going to be mounting those file systems and then installing Arch onto them. I'll see you then.